he needle points. Apparently, at the end of a rough day, arresting people at the border, he goes back home and puts his feet up by the fire and does needlepoint.
Hey, welcome to 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. We're a father-son leadership podcast where we talk with other lifelong learners about making an impact and solving big problems. And Camden, I had to solve a timing issue. Folks, it will have happened already by the time this show comes out, but we're doing a whiskey and cigars evening here in a couple of days. And I did a little test run with our new fire pit. And the tree limbs were a little low, let's just say. Thank God I didn't have to get out the fire extinguisher. But I had to do some forest mitigation, which just reminds me of yours and Miss Jessica's green thumb of what y'all are doing down there in the desert. What's the latest on the flowers in the garden?
I was going to say, I remember our rule of thumb when I was still living up with you was you trim the pine trees up about 6 foot, in my case, about 6'5", so you could walk under the trees. How big were you getting that fire, Dad? Well,
it's a new system, so we're testing it out, and let's just say it might have gotten a little aggressive last night.
I'd open up the throttle. But no, things are good here in the desert. Things are dying. Things are starting to die. The garden still looks good. The grass is all dead. We got some asparagus and okra going in right now. So fingers crossed if the okra goes well, everyone who comes out to the McGregor gumbo parties will have fresh okra, whether you're in Tucson or Colorado. That's the goal this year.
There we go.
We'll see.
Well, Craig, there's your incentive to join us at Gumbo this year. Our good friend Craig Glass is joining us. Craig, do you and Ms. Burl have a garden out back? Y'all planting flowers or vegetables?
Not in the back. We went from lawn to 100% rocks in the back about 5 years ago by a combination of voles and cottonwood trees literally soaking all of the water and killing the lawn. But in the front yard, yes, we do. My wife puts enormous work into a really pretty garden. It's not vegetables or anything like that. Tomatoes and carrots have not worked in this climate, but we got a pretty nice looking garden.
There's a reason you see those cottonwood trees. There's a reason you always see the cottonwood trees in the creeks. There's a really good reason for that.
That's right. They go together.
Yeah. I love it. I can't wait to see it, and hopefully the snow, the infamous, mysterious spring snowstorm here in Colorado will come at the right time, not the day after they're in the ground.
It's coming.
Yes, it is. Craig, man, I'm excited. Like you and I have talked about many times, I always love your story, and we'll get into that. But the thing I wanted to kick it off, and it's actually something I ask all of our entrepreneurs is what was the catalyst? What was the gist that got you that you left the organization that you had been working with for so many years and decided to break out on your own?
Yeah. I'm already shaking my head as you started the question. I knew where you were going, Otis. I shake my head because it was just so clear. I spent 20 years in leadership of a mission agency with teams around the world. My role was to train and send and oversee them and do pastoral care. In one way, I thought it was going to be the rest of my life. And frankly, truthfully, in another way, for about the last 5 years I was there, the nagging thought in my mind was, this matters. I love it. Thank you, Lord. Something's missing. Something's missing about what's in here that is untapped. And I had a couple of experiences that dramatically changed my perspective of what I wanted to give my life to. I'll just mention one of them real quickly. Like I said, we trained missionary candidates. They went through 6 months of training before they went overseas, 30 or 40 candidates. And we consistently, like every other mission agency, had candidates who were healthy and going over to France or Brazil or the Philippines for all the right reasons. And consistently, a handful, 10, 15% who had no business trying to do cross-cultural ministry because they had unresolved wounds and hurts and angers in their lives. And it was a result of working with Christian counselors that we got to a point of being able to do a better job of sending those who should go and holding back those who really need another step before going overseas. And here's the thing that stood out, you guys. It didn't really, of those that we consistently had to hold back and encourage to go get counseling, it wasn't as obvious as, well, they're all men. No, not at all. It wasn't as obvious as they're all single and they're miserable till they get married. No, it wasn't that at all. And it wasn't they're all angry or they're all poor self-esteem or shame or whatever. 95% of the time, the common factor in those who had unresolved wounds that affected their relationships with others, 95% of the time, the center of the story, their father. Their relationship with your dad. And it suddenly smacked me in the face when I'm talking with a guy who wants to lead a team in Moscow, and he's got an outrageous sense of just beneath the surface anger. Ask him about his dad, or about the young lady from California who wants to go overseas and work in Paris with our French team, who is regularly sexualizing her presentation and how she dresses or how she kind of comes on. Just have a conversation and say, hey, tell me about you and your dad. And I'm telling you guys, you're going to find the clue. 95% of the time. It just, and so it smacked me in the face. Along with one or two other experiences, it just hit me so strongly. Craig, what are you passing on to your kids that will live in the next generation? Is your hand primarily one of blessing, or is it more often one of control and barely controlled temper and that sort of thing? And I had to look in the mirror and say, man, I need to do some things about how I'm raising my kids, and I cannot ignore the enormous impact that men, and fathers in particular, pass on to the next generation for blessing or destruction. I can't ignore that. I got to do something about that. And so shortly after that, as I think you know, Otis, I was invited to join a team of church staff in Chicago, in a mega church there, leading the men's ministry. And that's what I've done ever since then, the last about 30 years doing that. Last 25 years in Colorado Springs.
There's a leadership lesson that I would love to dive into, which is you talked about they have those folks who had those unresolved wounds. They weren't ready to go do the mission work. Well, you as the leader have to kind of explain to them, like, hey, you don't get to go yet. Kind of set them on their new path where they can still have the goals that they want to work toward, still have that purpose that they're working towards. But at the same time, you have to be like, all right, hey, take a lap, take a little time, whatever it is, right?
Oh, man, that's absolutely the case. And I'm sure you guys have done it or seen it yourselves. Sometimes the most important leadership impact you can have with some person is to let them know the plan that they have in mind is not going to be the best plan. There's something that needs to get changed first, or a different direction. And listening to that guidance or oversight from others who care, have experience and insight, listening to that voice is very, very important, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. And hearing, I think the other piece of that is hearing others and trusting others' opinions. Now, you're a man of faith and man of God. So, and we've had this talk before. I know God called you to this mission, but there was probably some human factor involved in that mentoring. How did that come to be as you continue to shift into this men's ministry?
Yeah. Boy, We could spend a lot of time on that one, Otis. That's a great subject. How I did not naturally see myself as a mentor to men. I can tell you that. That's not what I studied in school. And that's not how I entered cross-cultural ministry. As you know, that's not the route I took. Maybe we can talk about that too. But I was mentored. I was informally, indirectly mentored by a small handful of men in my life, most particularly the founder and president of that missionary agency that I joined. And to my shock and surprise, in a conversation Burl and I had with him about a year after coming out of college, he said, I think you're the guy, you're the couple to lead our team smuggling Bibles behind the Iron Curtain. I mean, what are you seeing that I don't see? And he trusted, and he placed me in that role. And over time, more and more roles of leadership and influence. That's what happened for me, you guys. It was being the recipient of wise, courageous, insightful mentoring from a small handful of other men, and then turning the direction. When I made that move, basically from that mission agency to working with men, the direction was so clear to me. It sounds a little bit weird to say it this way, but I'll go ahead and say, I got to go after men. I got to go after men. If you want to change society, you have got to go after the men. And I've done this internationally as well as domestically, you guys, and it's the same is true. I went to Burundi a handful of years ago. You guys might know that's in Africa, along with Rwanda, experienced years and years of genocide. 100,000 people killed in the first week, and it lasted for years. And I was called to go over there by a ministry of working with women in Burundi, trying to teach them to recover from warfare, but to provide for their families. And I talked to her. She said, Craig, we got to get you over here. How come? You're working with women. I know. We need somebody to go after the men. Until we get the men, there's no hope for this country. That's the way it is, guys.
I got to add, I think that's so interesting. And we've talked before on the show, Dad, about my development economics classes, and some of the logic that goes into that is really interesting. And one of the things that comes to mind is in development economics, one of the rules I got was that you need to focus on the women. And the reason, Craig, is really interesting because the men were basically considered lost causes in a lot of those ways. The program that always comes to mind was Progressa down in Mexico, where it was like they tried to give money to the men, and the men would just spend it all at the bar on the way home, and the women wouldn't get any of it. If you give the money to the women, then they spend it on food, and they do all these sort of things. But I think the interesting thing that you're having me realize now, Craig, is that is true, and that is a good way of looking at it, but that's almost like a Band-Aid solution to the bigger problem, which is, well, why are the men spending all the money at the bar on the way home? Why aren't they the ones providing for the family? Why aren't they seeing it that direction? Could you talk a little bit about that mindset shift?
That's so absolutely true, Cam. And it's not just in Burundi. Of course, I would say it's in virtually every culture. And I've not been to every country around the world, but I've been to scores of them, honestly. The women know how to be engaged with the family. They know how to care for and provide for and protect their children. Goodness sake, you do not want to get in the way of a mom and a kid, just like with bears. But the men so often are distracted by a focus just to business or success, or a focus on possessions or power. The men in these nations, like Burundi, I said it, or it came to my mind as you were talking, Cam, they're in the streets. That's the problem. They're in the streets and they're drunk. They're getting high and they're carousing. Where are the women? They are caring for the family. And men, we see this so often in our culture too. We've got to be honest and look in the mirror and say, this is a quality that takes place in the United States too, particularly in certain demographics and certain geography, talk about the inner city in particular. Oh my goodness. It's the women who are raising the kids. It's the women who are taking them to church. How much do we need men in these cultures, in those societies, to be stepping up and do the same?
Yeah, I mean, you think about it. Even the what was the oh man, I just drew a blank on that really popular show about the marketing agency, and it was the men. You know, that time frame in the 50s and 60s where Mad Men. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, where you know it was common practice. The man's role was to go to work, get a paycheck to get in the bank, stop at the bar, come home, have dinner, and maybe go meet up with his buddies and have another drink. There was never. It's interesting, you know, with all the growth and change in our society, that's no longer an accepted.
No.
You know, course of action, if you will, for men. I mean, yeah, it still happens. I mean, but it's not a, you know, for most men, I would say, it's not an every night thing. So I'd be curious in your path of from becoming just taking the path. Dang, had to get that out. Taking the path to become a men's minister. What other kind of cultural shifts have you seen on the positive side? Because we tend to dive into the negative. What have you seen on the positive side?
Yeah. I think there are a handful. Let's see what comes to mind. I would say, first of all, I think, Cam's generation, I think, is far more engaged in parenting or in the household than my generation was, than ours, Otis. I don't mean to group you too higher than you are as far as age, but
I'm still over here, Craig.
That's one of the differences. Another is a willingness to reveal the inner story, to be honest about their own story. I think men are far more willing to do that than in my generation, and way more, indescribably more than in my dad's. Essentially, I knew very little of my dad's inner story. I had a great dad, wonderful dad, loving provider, all of that stuff. I can't possibly be more thankful than the dad that I had, but I did not know his inner story. I knew where he got educated. I knew his job. I knew he liked football and the Cubs. I don't know anything about his inner story, or I did not, and I never did. About struggles, fears, hopes, desires, challenges, failures, none. I think that's something that has improved, Otis, with men in our culture in recent years, is a willingness to invite other men into the inner journey. That's what you guys do. That's what I do.
Sorry, I thought you had one there, Dad. Sorry, I thought I heard you loaded one up. With that, I think there's an interesting piece of making that shift, and then what do you see as the impact of that shift? Because a lot of the times we can kind of see the trajectory, and it's like, okay, that makes sense for me, to be a more present father, more present husband, all these kind of things. Not go to the bar every night on my way home, right? Okay, I can check those boxes. What does that do to help the future?
Well, I know what the potential is. I think the potential is a more engaged man. And I don't, of course, in the audience here, we're probably talking to women too, and we're not just talking to dads or married men. I'm sure we're talking to single men too. I think there's the potential for greater connection, a greater sense of brotherhood with other men, a greater connection with our wives and with children. And I use the word potential on purpose. I think we also have to say, that's not 100% solved. There's quite possibly no more disconnected generation of single men than the one that's going on right now. And I'd put the grouping 20 to 45, somewhere in that category. What we know in our society, you guys, is men are increasingly alone. They're working at home, or they're not working at all. They're engaged in online stuff, virtual relationships, rather than actual flesh and blood relationships. I don't mean to be too broadly generic in my conversation, my description, but it is true. The statistics demonstrate it. The lonely American male, that was a phrase that came out 20 or 25 years ago. My goodness, it's just as true now. Man, gosh, do we need to help men find ways to connect with other men?
Yeah, it's everything from meeting and talking to your neighbors to the randomness in the grocery store to actually events, organizations, networks, where you are getting out and interacting. I think it's too easy to stay hidden behind a screen, whether it's a small one or a big one, and count that. Even today, we're and if I'd had the technology, Craig, I would have had you over to the house to do it here, to do the show here, but we don't have the technology, so this works out much better.
Isn't it? That's funny.
But it doesn't count. It doesn't count the same as the other night when you and I were sitting there having a beer together, right? There's a different human interaction, and I've talked about this on a number of occasions. I'd love your thoughts on the shoulder to shoulder, the physical shoulder to shoulder. We're virtually shoulder to shoulder right now on the show, but the physical shoulder to shoulder, and where you've experienced some changes and seen that happen, and how that's changed the attitude of men you've worked with.
Yeah. Well, I have seen that, Otis, and one of the first guy's stories I'd have to refer to is this guy's. I lived my life. I had guy friends, and particularly in the arena of sports, lots of guy friends. But I kind of repeated the pattern of my dad. I did not let other guys in deeply at all. The way that I was raised, both culturally and spiritually, and in terms of performance and presentation, was reveal the good, hide the bad, emphasize the strong, cover up the weak. That's the way I was raised. Nobody said those words, but that's what I landed in. And that's the way I lived my life for many, many years, you guys. If I can excel in sports, then I'm going for it. If I'm not sure how well I'm going to do, I'm backing off. But over time, I discovered that the primary person that suffered from lack of exposure in relationships with other guys, the primary person who suffered was me. And I needed to take the chance with the right guy at the right time to tell the right story and just see what happens. Just see how he responds. And you discover, holy cow, I'm not the only one. I'm not the only Christian guy who gets pulled by pornography or lust in a restaurant watching a girl go by. I'm not the only one. For a while, I thought I was the only one until I risked telling the story. There's a Bible verse that says, walk in the light. Walk in the light. Walk in openness. Get out of the darkness. Allow light to shed into the darker corners of your life. Walk in the light, and you'll have brotherhood with each other. And the love of Christ will continue to transform you. Wow, holy cow. Those are two pretty good things that come as a result of being honest with other men. Brotherhood happens, not judgment and condemnation. That shouldn't happen. Every now and then it does. Brotherhood happens. I'm not the only guy walking this path. And the act of befriending others actually starts to transform us. I kind of believe this rather strongly, you guys.
I can tell. I'm curious, and Dad, you feel free to jump on this too. When we start talking about the shoulder to shoulder and the cultural shift things, I think there's this really interesting thing that has to happen where we can take, my generation, I can look back at your generation, Dad, and say, okay, well, you guys were all this kind of way, and we need to get rid of all of that, and all of that's bad, and all. It's like, okay, well, no, that's probably not true. There's things that are more naturally, and they're okay, and then there's negative aspects of them, and you have to really tease those out, and it's a really tricky thing. The thing that comes to mind with the shoulder to shoulder is like one of my best friends, Norman, our old producer. We were out digging in the garden. You talked about at the beginning of the show, Dad, out there digging in the garden, tilling the soil, having great conversations about all sorts of those kind of things that you're talking about, Craig. We were shoulder to shoulder having those conversations. And it's like, I think there's an interesting thing to try to tease out those mechanisms of, is the shoulder to shoulder bad? Is that just naturally how we like it and we just need to adapt to that situation? What are your thoughts there, Craig?
Yeah. Do you want to go, Otis?
Oh, I want to hear yours.
Okay. Well, you're reminding me of an author and a couple of books I read. It's got to be about 30 years ago now. A guy named Stu Weber, Special Forces guy, wrote a book called Tender Warrior, for goodness sake. Wait a minute. Who ever heard of those two words together? Tender Warrior and shoulder to shoulder. I think there's a lot of ways in which women know naturally, intuitively how to connect to each other. Let's even say face to face. Women congregate, women report, men scatter. And if they do share, it's information. It's not really connecting from the heart. Typically, women intuitively know how to do this. Guys, not so much. What guys are a little bit better at is being shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm, working on something, tearing something down, blowing it up, constructing it, accomplishing a win for your sports team. Shoulder to shoulder is how guys do stuff. I think we also need to be guided in learning how to go, not just shoulder to shoulder, face to face, heart to heart. And that was a journey for me. I would say, Otis, I bet that was a journey for you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I don't go face to face very often. I can tell you that.
Well, the shoulder to shoulder and having those conversations, that's the halfway step. I would say that. Working towards the face to face is good. But if you are somebody who don't have those, social skills is the word that comes to mind. If you don't have that ability, then it's like, well, I'd rather dump my heart out to somebody while we're digging a hole together than to just bottle that up entirely, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would say there's also this interesting piece, and I can't remember where I got it from. When you and your brother and sister were younger, it was, and I've heard it also with my grandson, is you got to get down on their level, and with men, the activity, because, to take you, Camden, when you were 10 and sit down and say, all right, let's talk about how feelings are going. That ain't going to work. But if we go outside and we kick the soccer ball around, because you hadn't learned rugby yet, unfortunately, it took a couple more years.
What a fool I was.
I know. I can't believe that. But if we went outside and kicked the soccer ball around, we might be able to talk about, well, why are you screwing things up at school? Why aren't you? As opposed to, all right, let's sit down here at the kitchen table and let's work out life, because the mind doesn't work that way. And I think that continues on particularly with men, or maybe it's not just men, maybe it's more our culture and I need to be moving forward. That's where I'm at. It's like, all right, well, how is this moving us forward to have this discussion? Where are
Right.
we going? What's the next thing that the next problem we're going to address and attack and fix? Because
Yeah.
that's what we do, right?
Yeah.
And I think with men, we see the strength in the, you can't attack something when you're both coming together like this. But if we go, all right, let's go arm in arm and let's go get it, right? Let's scrum down. And there we go. Camden, 2 rugby references very quickly.
Perfect.
Let's scrum down and fix this problem, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and I think that's maybe it is a little bit of culture. Maybe it's a little bit of caveman brain survival thing. I don't know. Any thoughts on that part, Greg? The origin story.
Yeah, I do. I think it's very perceptive, Otis. I think it's both and. I think there is I know there's a cultural thing. Our culture, our masculine culture, even our women are pretty much being raised in the same culture. You accomplish, you do stuff, you progress, you learn more, you move up the ladder, you accomplish stuff, and that is a high value in our culture. I have been in other cultures, perhaps you have been too, where men walk down the street arm in arm.
Mm-hmm.
Or in the middle of the day, seemingly men who are of an age that they're probably working, providing for their family somewhere, somehow, sitting over a cup of coffee at a table in the middle of the day, just talking. They're not talking about the bottom line or the business or the next merger. I don't know what they're talking about. So I think for sure, Otis, I think you're right. There's a cultural issue involved too. And I think there's also a way in which we just have to learn to get more comfortable going beneath the surface with each other, whatever culture we're in. But we guys need to learn to get beneath the surface and trust one another. I love what you said, and you're talking to Cam about rugby or whatever it is, and hard to have a personal conversation that way. Here's one story I'd like to tell where that sort of thing worked for me and one of my sons. And I won't mention which one he was, but there was
know.
Yeah, you're right. He will. Well, so with the other son, because he knows it wasn't him. But yeah, one of my sons, when he was 11, we noticed he's pulling away from his friends at school. We noticed his grades are going downhill. And we also noticed that on our phone bill, we got a charge for a 900 sex call that, thank goodness, I knew nothing about. Burl's first question was, do you know anything about this? No. And this is 20 years ago, you guys, so I don't even know if that sort of stuff still happens. But at any rate, there's something I got to have a conversation with him about. I had no idea how to do it, but I moved into the unknown, into the mystery. Just take one step, just take the next step into what you think you ought to do. And the first step turned out to be go to 31 Flavors and get some ice cream. That was the first step. The next one, thank God, he told me, basically, he revealed to me, Craig, don't start with his story, start with your story. Oh, it turns out, at 11, I got exposed to pornography, and I told him. It turns out that in junior high, I got abandoned by 2 of my best friends from 6th grade, and I pulled into a shell. It turns out my grades suffered as a result. All the same things I'm seeing in him, and I'm tempted to use his name, but I won't. I'm seeing in my own son. I tell my story, and he discovers, like what I long to hear from my dad, I'm not the first guy to experience this. I'm not even the first glass male to experience this. And so he opened up and he said, it wasn't even me, the sex call. I had so-and-so over for after school, you guys weren't home, and he said, hey, let's charge this call and listen to what this person is going to say. And he did have some friends at school abandon him, and that was causing a problem with his grades. We just went to a level, you guys, that we never would have been able to if my first word had been, what the heck is wrong with you? Why aren't your grades better? No. I told my story, and we had a great conversation, and at the end of it, it was kind of funny. He's an 11-year-old, and he goes, Dad, it's great to get this off our chests. It was. It was.
No,
It was great to get it off. I say this a lot, you guys, and I've already said it once. I'll say it a second time in this conversation. You need to learn. We need to learn when to tell the right story to the right person at the right time. Daughters too, wives too, buddies too.
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me, I know just recently I had a good friend who had a death in his family, and I remember talking with him about some of my experiences with death and, suicide and those kind of things. And I remember he kind of had this moment of like, Camden, really? Like, we were best friends back then. You never told me any of these things. And it was, I had this little bit of epiphany of like, wow, I did bottle that. I didn't feel like it, thinking back to specifically that, like Michael Black and like that. Like, I had my rugby community. I wasn't totally isolating myself, but there was a good friend who was outside of that community who didn't even know that I had gone through that. And by sharing that story, he was able to connect with me, and we were able to talk through a lot of those things. But there's something really interesting. You talked about the need to solve a problem. And I think that's a really interesting thing that we have built into us, whether it's biological, cultural, caveman brain, lizard brain, whatever it is, we have that, right? We have this desire to solve a problem. And I think when it comes into these areas that we're talking about today, what makes it so difficult is that there's not an answer. I picture one of my first times being at a funeral and sitting next to somebody who's crying, and I didn't know what to do, and I just sat there because I was like, I don't have an answer. I don't know how to help this person, therefore I'll do nothing. And that becomes our answer a lot of the time, where we're like, I don't know how to solve this problem, therefore I'm not even going to take a swing at it. And that's a really, frankly, pardon my language, that's a really shitty way to solve problems. Like, that's like, if you were doing that in your business, you're like, I don't know the answer here, we're just not going to touch it. Yeah. Like, that is the worst CEO ever. Like, why are we doing that with our lives? And I think we need to go over. Yeah, exactly, right? So I think it's like shifting the mindset towards, yes, we're still working towards solving the problem, and that can still be the goal, but you need to be comfortable that you're not going to solve it in this conversation. That day over ice cream might not solve it, but it's going to take you moving forward with it. Could you talk a little bit, Craig, about kind of reframing that problem? Honestly, it reminds me of what we were saying earlier, the first example of, the leadership example of the folks who weren't ready for the mission, and you had to show them the other path. That's really what we're talking about here. We want the direct path. We can't take it. Time to, meander around a little bit.
Yeah. What I'm reminded of is that it sounds kind of lame to say it, but I'll say it anyway. Often it's not so much about the destination or the goal. It's about the journey. Life's about the journey. I say regularly with men, we're on a physical journey with a spiritual destination. Or to people in the audience who may not think that way, we're in a physical journey with a significant relational growth, transformation, destination. That's what's going on. And so, we're so goal oriented and accomplishment oriented. Sometimes we need to realize today I may not solve the problem, but I can at least talk to another colleague that I got a problem, or I need him or her to resolve the problem. Well, that's an accomplishment all by itself. Just to say, I need you. Or to have somebody else say to us at work or wherever it is, I could use you. Rather than just focusing on the end result, on the goal. Sometimes it's just as much about the journey.
That is so true. And I want to shift gears. And Camden, you took my perfect segue, because I was going to say, speaking of stories, because Folks, Craig has some espionage stories that you would never have guessed. And being a child of the Cold War who fought the Cold War when I first joined the Army in the evil Soviet Empire,
Yeah.
my good friend Craig was fighting the evil Soviet Empire, unbeknownst to them and most people. So, Craig, I mean, I love the one about the guard. That's a great one. But I'm just gonna I'm gonna shut up because I want you to tell just tell one of those awesome stories of
Yeah.
espionage.
Before you go, Craig, I just got to say, earlier you said smuggling Bibles behind the Iron Curtain, and I wrote that down. Like, that's a weird metaphor, and I was waiting to ask later about it, so I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I just kind of threw that out there, realizing there are some people listening that have no idea what the Iron Curtain was or why we take Bibles there. Otis, as you started asking the question, I started scrolling through, well, which story should I tell? I think when you said the border guard, of course, they all involved a border guard. But I think I know the one you're talking about. I'll go that direction. But also just I got to set the stage. This is the 1970s, you guys. This is when the Iron Curtain was literally a barbed wire landmine guard dog fences, machine guns, AK-47s from Poland all the way down to Bulgaria and everywhere in between. And my wife and I were on a team of naive Americans and Canadians and Brits and Germans that thought, let's just take Bibles behind this thing and see what happens. And so we had them in vehicles, usually vans, camping vans and cars with hidden compartments where we would go across the border and hopefully they didn't see them. On this one particular trip, we went to Bulgaria. I don't know if this is lining up with your memory of which country or story. Yeah, okay. So we're going to Bulgaria. These countries were sort of like baseball. You're in danger in all of them. If you get caught, you're quite likely getting your vehicle confiscated. You're quite possibly going to be put in jail for who knows how long. But the Soviet Union is the major leagues. I mean, they are the major leagues. You get caught there, it's history. Bulgaria is kind of right in the same category. You get caught in Bulgaria doing something contraband for them. And by the way, contraband for them was guns, drugs, pornography, Bibles. Same category. It's contraband. Anyway, we pull up to this border guard in Bulgaria, and as it turned out, we were not using a vehicle with hidden compartments. The Bibles that we had were in cardboard boxes, pushed behind the front seat of this camping van that we had, covered up with blankets and groceries and suitcases and stuff. If a guard opened up the door and went inside, he's going to find them. And we just, we couldn't spread our specialized vehicles far enough around. That's how Burl and I went on this trip. But I made a point of sticking a Sports Illustrated magazine on the back counter as the guard would open the door on the back right-hand side counter, that he would be distracted by that, hopefully, and not go any further into the vehicle. As we drove for hours and hours and hours in horrific conditions, one of the things my wife did was needlepoint or stitching or knitting, all sorts of hand stuff. Great. That amused her during these trips. Anyway, we got at the border, big, gruff, frightening grizzly bear of a guy with an AK-47 says, roll down the window. I do passport, give him the passport, show back door. So we go to the back door, I open him up, and I think he's going to see Sports Illustrated. No, that's not what happened. What happened was Burl had put her needlepoint magazines on top of my magazine, and that's what fell to the floor. And I'm standing next to this guy thinking, this is not going to distract him at all. I'm in trouble. I want him to see American football, not needlepoint. He picks up this needlepoint magazine. and starts looking at it. And I'm looking to him and thinking, this is going to go like another 2 or 3 seconds. I got to be ready to answer the question, why do you have Bulgarian Bibles in the back of your vehicle? He starts paging through the needlepoint catalog. And finally, he turns to me and he says, what this called? What's this called? I hardly knew. I barely even know, is it knitting or crusted? I don't know. But I took a shot at it and I said, needlepoint. He repeats after me, needlepoint. Pause, looks around to the other guards, turns to me and he says, I needlepoint. Wait, what? He needlepoints. Apparently, at the end of a rough day, arresting people at the border, he goes back home and puts his feet up by the fire and does needlepoint. I cannot believe what I'm hearing. So I start showing him all these patterns, lovely roses and castles and gardens and things like that. And finally, he takes up enough time. He throws the magazine in, closes the door, and says, "Welcome to Bulgaria." And the Bibles got through, and we took them to a pastor that night, gave him 500 Bibles.
Wow.
Yeah, and folks, that's just one of many.
That's just one. That's just one.
Yeah. If you join one of Craig's groups, you'll get to hear a couple more. And I'll just say they're all just as amazingly awesome, scary, and fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, that, it just reminded me of something I love to do with my fellow veterans. But I think I should ask you the same question. Is in those adventures, those Bible smuggling, espionage adventures, there was a lesson. And many, I'm sure, like, if the guard does needlepoint, make sure you have needlepoint magazines or catalogs.
Yeah, I didn't plan on that.
What I'd love is, what is a lesson from that time period that you still fall back on and remind yourself of now in your current ministry?
Wow, boy. I'll tell you one that immediately comes to mind, Otis. And you've been there. You've been there during the weeks that I teach, this group of guys over the past several years. You've been there. You have substitute taught for me when I've traveled. Here's what comes to my mind, and maybe we can unwrap this a little bit if there's time, I don't know. But what comes to my mind is, there comes a point in life, whether the arena is your family or work, your vocation, your relationships, there comes a time in life where I think what's called upon us is to courageously step into the unknown. Courageously step into it. That's for sure what I was doing that day in 1977 with that Bulgarian border guard. I had no idea what's at the end of the story. All I know is I'm moving in. And then depending on how he reacts when he sees the Sports Illustrated or the needlepoint or nothing, depending on how he reacts is when I now do the next step. I now say the next thing, or I now clarify the next thing, or whatever it is. I don't know what it's going to be, but I now move into the next step. And I'm thinking about a workplace setting, you guys, or Camden, I'm looking at you, work or family. How often guys in your age group and your setting, your responsibility, don't know exactly what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know what the consequences are going to be, but I don't want to stay paralyzed, nor do I want to stay silent. I'm going to take one step into. And by the way, that doesn't end. Otis and I continue to live that out. with grandkids or whatever it is. Take the next step into, and then you respond to that. And for those of us people of faith, frankly, I just got to say, for me, I just had to rely on the belief and my conviction that in the end, God's in charge of the whole deal. He's not necessarily going to save my butt. He's going to let consequences happen when bad people do bad stuff. But on the other hand, there might be a time he intervenes and he causes a border guard to start asking questions about needlepoint, for Pete's sake. I didn't plan that. So I think it's a life lesson, you guys. Move into, step toward, bring what you know to the occasion, and then be ready to respond with whatever next needs to happen. Action, word, a hug, a compliment, whatever it is. How's that sound?
I love it. I love it because, I believe in that wholeheartedly. You have to believe that next thing I'm going to do is the right thing. And,
gee. I mean, Otis, man, I just apply that to your special forces career. Good. For Pete's sake. You almost never knew what the next thing is going to be for sure. So you turn around, pack it up. No, you take the next step.
Yeah. And a shameless self plug. I did a master class the other day on scripting chaos and what that means and how do you do that? Because there's a lot of truth to that. And chaos always exists in the future, right? The future is unknown. And in order to survive the future, you have to prepare for it today by taking action towards the future into that unknown. But the things that you do, the preparations, the training, the practices, the discussions, whatever those things are the things that prepare you for those unknowns.
You prepare for what you can. And I just got to say, you're reminding me exactly of a guy who I heard speak at Glen Erie here in Colorado Springs, probably 30 years ago. And he said, what we need to do when we're not sure what to do, when we face confusion, you said chaos. Mm-hmm. When he said, when we face confusion, what you do is you face it with creativity and courage. Yeah. And just do the next thing.
Yeah, and I just add the rugby lesson that, Dad, you taught this, and I still coach this exact same mindset of the first 3 steps every single time. When you get up from a breakdown, when you get tackled, whatever it is, you don't know what's happening. You don't know what your next job is going to be, but I know it's over there. And so I take 3 hard steps and I start moving. And you know what? The real thing is, this is the real secret. People never tell you you can solve the problem while you're moving. Like, I could still ideate while I'm moving. Like, it's not like it's one or the other. Yes, you might need to pause to do a little thinking, but it's like, I can keep moving and still be thinking about what the best action is.
That's good. Yeah. You don't have to just stop in the middle of the field, say, time out, time out, time out. No, you actually think while you're moving.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of rugby. And it all comes back to the preparation. And that preparation is the continuous learning. And what I learned today is many, many things. But I'm going to reemphasize this phrase because I think it's so important for all of us, not just men, but all of us to understand and believe this, is that I'm not the first guy or gal to experience this, and I won't be the last. And in other words, it's not woe is me. That's really what it means. It's not woe is me. How screwed up is my life? It's not, right? You're not the only one who's dealt with this. There's been other people who have dealt with this. And I think that's such an important piece to remember and share with others. So,
yeah.
Camden, how about you? What'd you learn?
Yeah, for me, I think around the conversation around needing to solve a problem And that need, that desire to solve a problem isn't the bad thing there. It's the inaction when you don't have the answer, which is the bad thing. And being able to take that imperfect action, or not even imperfect action, but knowing what that next step is and knowing it might not solve the problem, but it's going to move you in that right direction. That's such an important thing, especially when you start getting into, the things that are much harder to solve. Dad, we've talked off air about perpetual problem and the idea of, constantly solving problems because every solution creates another problem in the big picture. Those kind of things. Well, it's like if you stop and look for the perfect solution, you're never going to find it. You have to solve that problem, keep moving. Then when the next problem comes up, you'll solve that one too, and just keep moving. To take your phrase, Craig, go courageously into the unknown. Go solve that next problem.
Yeah.
Awesome. Craig, how about you, man? What'd you learn?
Well, I learned several things, but I'll mention 3 really quickly. One, there's a beauty to rugby. Who knew? Secondly, I love that comment pretty recently, Camden. You can actually think creatively. You can come up with ideas while you're still moving. That's quite good. That's a very applicable lesson. That's great. Third thing, this is by watching and listening, you guys. I love the father-son exchange and connection, and how you bring your own thing and who you are to the benefit of the other person and to the show. I can't help but notice that.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Craig. And how do folks find you, follow you, learn about your men's ministry?
Yeah, the name of the ministry is Peregrine Ministries. Peregrine's kind of falcon, Peregrine, peregrineministries.org is our website. I've written a book called Noble Journey, The Quest for a Lasting Legacy. That's available on Amazon, both a written version and audio version. People could take a look at that. And I've got a blog called Men Matter. In parentheses, it's not in the title, but in parentheses, they just don't think so. Yeah, and there's also both those phrases are true, by the way. So the blog's available on my website, peregrineministries.org.
Awesome, Craig, man, it has been such a pleasure hanging out with you today. Thank you so much for your time.
I've thoroughly enjoyed it, you guys, and nice to meet you, Camden.
All right, Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank y'all for listening to today's episode of 10X Your Team with Camden and Otis. And a special thanks to our guest, Craig Glass, for joining us today. Remember, you can watch full episodes of the show on YouTube at 10X Your Team. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to pass along to other lifelong learners in your tribe so that we can enjoy it too. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. As always, the full archive of episodes is available at www.10xyourteam.net. Thanks again. We'll see y'all next time.